Hello, and welcome to the Indiana Lawyer Podcast, your source for news and Hoosier law brought to you by Taft. I'm Alexa Shrake, Indiana Lawyer Reporter, and your host this week. I'm here with attorney Charles Braun. Charles not only is an attorney, but also trains police officers and is a radio talk show host. Additionally, you impersonate President Benjamin Harrison on occasion. So to start, I guess my first question is, how did it begin, you impersonating President Benjamin Harrison?
I enjoy being a public speaker. In fact, I can speak on over 30 different topics to organizations and have done that for years. And about 7 years ago, I was giving a speech to the Caroline Harrison chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution here in Indianapolis. Their headquarters is right next to the governor's mansion in a beautiful estate. And it's one of the largest in the entire country, as I said. And I gave a speech to them regarding the sacrifices of the average colonists during the American Revolution and the prices that they paid in order to secure our ultimate freedom from Great Britain. And after the presentation, there was a luncheon, and I was approached by a lady, and the first words out of her mouth were, "I want you to be my husband." And that took me by surprise. As it turns out, that was Elaine Schulte, and she was the current reenactor for Caroline Harrison, the First Lady. And the gentleman that was performing as President Harrison was in the process of retiring, and they were on a search for a replacement. And after hearing my speech, she thought that I would be an excellent replacement, and the rest is history. And Elaine has a great sense of humor, and that's why she approached me and said, "I want you to be my husband."
I've seen you at a few events hosted by the Benjamin Harrison presidential site. How often do you do events and go out and impersonate Benjamin Harrison?
It varies. It can be real busy in 1 month and then not so busy for a few months. And so there's really no average that I can give you. It's just touch and go, so to speak. But I do perform as Benjamin Harrison, not only at the home, but organizations will invite me to perform as Benjamin Harrison around the state of Indiana. And I do many appearances in the state of Ohio. After all, the Harrison family has a very strong connection to Ohio. Benjamin Harrison was born in 1833 in Ohio. His wife, Caroline Harrison, was also born in Ohio. They were ultimately married in Ohio. They both received their college educations in Ohio, and he passed the Ohio State Bar exam and then moved to Indianapolis. And of course, his grandfather, William Henry Harrison, the ninth president, was living in Ohio at the time that he was elected the ninth president. So I do a lot of performances in Ohio and Indiana.
What do you enjoy about those performances?
I enjoy trying to bring history alive and teaching folks on the greatness of Benjamin Harrison and his entire family. The Harrison family is one of the great political public servant-based families in American history, and I like sharing that. And many of the people that I come in contact with are school children at school type events. And I think it's important for the future leaders of America to learn about the greatness of our country, the greatness of the Constitution and the founding fathers that created it. And history should never be forgotten. And I enjoy that aspect of it as well. And then also, I really enjoy meeting folks that I would have never met had I not been performing as Benjamin Harrison. For example, when I do events at the presidential site here in Indianapolis, literally people from all over the world come and visit and take the tour. And when I'm reenacting, I get to interact with them. And then after the performance, sometimes we'll just talk about current matters when I complete my reenacting performance. And I've met people from nearly every state of the union and many countries, because obviously Indianapolis is a great convention city. And when these people come to Indianapolis for their conventions and sporting events, they're looking for things to do. And we are always top rated in terms of things to do in Indianapolis. And so I really like that aspect of it, meeting people from the entire world.
You mentioned this briefly. He was an Indianapolis attorney as well, just like you. Do you feel a connection to him?
I feel a very strong connection to him in so many ways. One that has been clearly established over the years. People always tell me that there's a strong resemblance between me and Benjamin Harrison. That is so strong with some individuals that one time I was giving a presentation in his library at the home, and there's a portrait of him, among others, in his office library. And a lady pointed to the picture, the portrait of Benjamin Harrison, which is very large, and said, "Oh, that's a portrait of you pretending to be Benjamin Harrison, right?" And I said, "No, ma'am, that's actually Benjamin Harrison himself." And she still was shaking her head, not really wanting to believe that it was an actual original portrait. She thought it was me in the portrait. It's that close of a connection with some folks. And when I look at his life and what he did in public service, and his views on government and the Constitution and our country, I feel a strong, strong connection to him in so many different ways. And I'm very proud to be the official reenactor for him. I think he's one of the greatest presidents in American history for so many different reasons. And I think our great presidential site is making great strides in upgrading his prominence among the history of American presidents.
But tell me a little bit about your other work. I know you have the radio show, and then you also do a lot of, police training. Tell me a little bit about that stuff.
Okay. Well, I've been practicing law now for 47 years, full time. And during that time period, I've done many different activities. I was a deputy attorney general for the state of Indiana for 10 years, serving under great attorney generals, Ted Sendak and then Lynn Pearson. I was in the litigation division, criminal justice section, where I had to represent all of the state level criminal justice agencies in federal and state litigation, wherever they would be sued. And then I would give these state criminal justice agencies legal advice on day-to-day matters, and also would be the presenter prosecutor in terms of employee misconduct cases that would be filed, for example, in front of the Indiana Civilian State Police Board. And so that got me into a lot of different courtroom venues, jury trials, bench trials. And then for another 29 years, I was the attorney and law instructor at the Indiana Law Enforcement Training Board and Academy, the first in-house attorney in state history to serve there. And during that time, I would train all of the newly appointed police officers who, for the most part, would come to the Indiana Law Enforcement Academy in Plainfield. And I would train these cadets over 60 hours of law, including traffic law, criminal law and procedure, constitutional law, how to testify in court, civil liability, use of force. Then I would teach all newly appointed jail officers their mandated law subjects and their required jail officers course. I would teach police chiefs, all newly appointed, who would have to attend a class and complete the training. And I would do all the law training for those newly appointed police chiefs. I would co-chair committees that would put together proposed legislation for law enforcement and then go to the legislature to get them passed. I co-chaired the committee that created the first mandatory continuing education law for police officers in Indiana. I co-chaired the committee that drafted the law that now permits the Law Enforcement Academy Training Board to decertify basic training certificates of officers who end up being unprofessional, who commit crimes and the sort. So I'm very proud of those legislative accomplishments in my 29-year career there. And I can say, because I did that for so long, that I have personally trained the vast majority of all police officers here in the state of Indiana. And then I've had a private practice for many, many years, focusing on police disciplinary matters. I serve as a police department legal advisor for various police departments. Another thing that I do is I don't know any other attorneys that really do this, but I get hired by police departments and go ahead and redo their entire standard operating procedure manuals to bring them up to date under the law and the best practices of law enforcement. And then for about 6 years now, I have been working for one of the largest private training companies here in America, PATC, Public Agency Training Council. And I go around the entire country putting on training programs, law training programs for police officers, correctional officers, firefighters, human resource directors, lawyers, in terms of how to conduct internal affairs, employee misconduct investigations, supervisory liability for those that are in those public agencies. And so with that, I'm constantly teaching around the country, and I have personally taught officers and firefighters from every state in the union.
Yeah, and then so you also have the radio show. Are you still doing that?
Yes, I am. Let's see, 41 years ago, it's hard to believe, 41 years ago, one of my clients was Dr. Gene Cease, who was then president of Indiana Central University, and he represented the academics, the universities and colleges on the Law Enforcement Training Board, and he and I became close. And 41 years ago, he asked me if I would be willing to produce and host a live radio talk show dealing with the law. At that time, they were converting their college radio station to a central Indiana powerful radio station, community radio station. And he thought it would be good to have a law show. And he respected my communication talents and me as a person, and it was vice versa. He recently passed away, and he was one of the greatest leaders I ever had the opportunity to serve with. He would have been a great governor, and he accomplished so much, both when he was president of the University of Indianapolis and when he engaged in other activities after he retired there. And he was my first guest 41 years ago, and the rest is history. It's the longest running radio show in America dealing with the law, 41 straight years.
Wow.
And it's every Saturday morning from 11 to 11:30 a.m. And literally people can call in and ask me any legal question under the sun. They can be general legal questions or questions about personal problems. And of course, I certainly emphasize all the time that when they call in about personal legal problems, I am not trying to become their lawyer. I am trying to give them an outsider's perspective, general information, tips and suggestions that they might consider in resolving their particular problem. And a doctor friend of mine just recently said, how courageous you are that you're willing to go on the public airwaves, unrehearsed, completely spontaneous, not knowing what legal question they might ask. And he thought that was incredible. And I've always enjoyed being extemporaneous speaker, and obviously a teacher is oftentimes that, an extemporaneous communicator. And so I use that talent for the radio show, and thousands of folks have called in over 41 years, and interesting things have happened, including a gentleman that called in and literally on the air, he confessed to murdering a person and wanted to give himself up, and wanted to know what would be the best way to give himself up. It was quite a unusual story. He said that years prior, he had two young daughters and living with him and his family on the farm, a family farm. And someone had just recently been released from prison and needed a place to temporarily stay. I don't know what the further connection was with that, but he allowed this person to live on his family farm. And ultimately, he discovered that this man had sexually abused both of his daughters. And that caused him to go into rage, and he killed him and buried him on the family farm. And this is when the girls were young, according to his story. And he always said that once he raised his daughters to maturity, to adulthood, he would then give himself up. And the engineers and the producers and many listeners thought that his story was very convincing and believable. It was not a stunt being done on the air.
What came of that? What did you do?
Well, of course, they're not required to give their name when they call in. They can remain anonymous. And I outlined the steps that I would have done in his case with respect to giving himself up. And he never called back, so I don't know what he did from that point forward.
Wow.
I was just going to say, I'm very proud of the fact that the listenership in Central Indiana, WICR draws a very great audience of wonderful people. And I can say over 41 years, basically only a handful of crank calls or strange calls have I ever received. Most of them are very conscientious and want to speak to the changes in the law or what the legislature is doing, or they call in on a personal problem. And, with the radio being on the internet now, I've gotten calls from people around the country who happen to listen to my radio show. And I've had people call me from London, for example, people that used to live in Indiana now living in London, and by the internet they stay in contact with my radio show, and they have actually called me from London. And I've gotten calls from Arizona, Nevada. Also, what happens, truck drivers passing through the crossroads of America happen to listen to my show. And so I've had a lot of out-of-state truck drivers calling me, asking me family law type questions, etc.
I think that covers most of my questions. I was wondering, do you have any upcoming performances as Benjamin Harrison?
Not in the immediate future, not through the remainder of this month, but things will begin to heat up, so to speak, next year. And one of our biggest events at the home is the 4th of July celebration. And that's something that is a social, and they have games for children, book readings, and musical entertainment, food. 4th of July is we have hundreds of people that come to celebrate the 4th on that day. And then we have a variety of events. One thing I wanted to mention to you, and it's topical, there are only 2 presidential sites in the entire country that we are aware of that are also active voting precincts. And the Benjamin Harrison home is an active voting precinct, and the only other one that we're aware of is the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in California. And so every primary and general election day, we are so proud to be an active part, not only being a source of history, great American history, but also continuing the Republic by actually allowing citizens to come. And, in Marion County, you don't have to go to your local precinct. So people from all over the county come to just experience voting at the presidential site. And that's a real accomplishment. And Charles Hyde, the CEO at the presidential site, and all of the professional staff and the volunteers are top-notch, first class all the way. And for years now, it has been a personal honor for me to not only perform as Benjamin Harrison, but to be part of the team at the presidential site.
Well, I think that covers my questions I had for you. Was there anything else that you wanted to add that I didn't think to ask you?
Well, I mentioned earlier that Benjamin Harrison comes from one of the greatest political public service families of all time. And I just wanted to quickly outline why I say that. His great-grandfather, Benjamin Harrison V, was a delegate from the Virginia colony to the First and Second Continental Congresses. And so he's one of the 56 signers to the Declaration of Independence. He was also the first human being to read out loud in its entirety the Declaration of Independence in world history, because he chaired the Committee of the Whole that finally approved the final version of the Declaration of Independence. His roommate was a close colleague of his, George Washington, the father of our country. And then he went on after the Revolution to be elected governor of Virginia multiple times. And then Benjamin Harrison's grandfather was the first Indiana territorial governor appointed by President Jefferson. And that was true wilderness at the time. And he took on a huge challenge, and he built the first brick structure west of the Allegheny Mountains at Grossland, which is still preserved as a historic site in Vincennes, Indiana. And people can visit that to get a sense of his greatness and leadership. And the Indiana Territory included much of the Midwest at the time. And then he became the 9th president. He gave the longest inaugural presidential address in history, an hour and 45 minutes. Unfortunately, he caught pneumonia, and he died after only 1 month in service. So he was the first president to die in office. He, as well as Benjamin Harrison, when he was elected the 23rd president, are the only grandfather-grandson duo to both be elected president in the same family. His father, John Scott Harrison, who was a Whig political party U.S. congressman in Ohio, is the only American citizen that can make the following factual claim. His father was president of the United States, William Henry Harrison, and his son was president of the United States, Benjamin Harrison. And Benjamin Harrison, of course, was also active in the Civil War and was a war hero serving the Northern Union Army. And his hero, Abraham Lincoln, appointed him because of his bravery in the Civil War, appointed him to the rank of brigadier general, which he considered to be the greatest accomplishment of his life. In fact, he preferred people calling him general rather than Mr. President because of all the sacrifices he saw in preserving our republic and expanding the liberties of the republic to more and more American citizens. And I could spend hours talking about his law accomplishments as well as his other presidential accomplishments, but that could be another story.
Excellent. Well, he does a lot, and very similar to you. You do a lot as well.
He was the first president of the Indiana State Bar Association. Benjamin Harrison was. And he was also one of the founding members of the Indianapolis Bar Association. And he was the crier for the U.S. District Court system here in Indianapolis. He was elected the Indianapolis City Attorney. He was also, right before the Civil War, elected reporter of the Indiana Supreme Court. So he argued more cases before the U.S. Supreme Court than any other president lawyer. He actually argued 15 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. So on all fronts, he was a great man. Of course, I'm biased.
Well, thank you so much for doing this and talking with me. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it very much. You do a wonderful job with your podcast, and it's very informative, and it's really a wonderful program you've created.
Okay, that'll do for this week's interview. Charles, thank you again for joining me today. To our listeners, stick around after our sponsor break to hear this week's headlines.
Taft, today's modern law firm. At Taft, we cultivate a highly respectful, transparent workplace that fosters creativity, teamwork, inclusion, and diversity. We couple our culture with a client-first approach, rewarding lawyers who understand their clients' goals and work to deliver success. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
Welcome back. Managing editor Daniel Carson and reporter Maura Johnson and I are here in our Monument Circle studio to give you the rundown on the latest legal news. So, let's get started. Today is Wednesday, December 11th, 2024, the state's birthday, and these are your headlines. Daniel, the Indiana Supreme Court has a few oral arguments scheduled for this month. What can you tell us about one for tomorrow?
The Indiana Supreme Court will hear oral arguments for a case involving an Indianapolis attorney's public records request that had been denied by the Indiana Family and Social Services Administration. The hearing will be held at 10 a.m. tomorrow in the Supreme Court courtroom. According to court documents, the dispute started when attorney Robert Saint requested a white paper from the agency via the Indiana Access to Public Records Act. He wanted to inspect and copy a white paper that HealthNet Incorporated, a private healthcare provider, had sent to FSSA to try to settle a dispute over how much HealthNet should be reimbursed by Medicaid. HealthNet is a federally qualified health center that provides services to patients enrolled in Medicaid. It owns and operates medical clinics throughout Indianapolis, according to court documents. FSSA denied the request, citing a disclosure exception for intra-agency deliberative materials. The Marion Superior Court determined that exception did not apply and ordered the agency to produce the white paper. The agency appealed, and a divided Court of Appeals affirmed the lower court's decision. FSSA sought transfer to the state's high court. In an opinion issued in June, the appellate court held that the deliberative material exception in the Public Records Act applies to communications, like letters, memorandums, and emails, from one agency employee to another, if the communication consists of opinions or thoughts about a future agency decision.
Thanks, Daniel. Now to Maura, who has news about a settlement between the City of Carmel and a business.
The City of Carmel and a vacation home business have reached a settlement agreement following a lawsuit that alleged the company illegally operated a short-term rental property in the city. On March 21st and May 31st of this year, the company Vacation Homes LLC, through its owner, Serena Burkhardt, received notices of allegedly violating Carmel's Unified Development Ordinance. The lawsuit, filed in July, claimed the company was illegally operating a short-term rental property on Singletree Court. An attorney for Vacation Homes LLC and Burkhardt told the Indiana lawyer via email he had no comment on the settlement. Corporate counsel for the City of Carmel told the Indiana lawyer via email, quote, "We are satisfied with the terms of the settlement. The City of Carmel has a process for homeowners wanting to pursue a permit for rental of their property. We will continue our enforcement efforts to bring non-compliant properties into compliance," end quote. On November 21st, the two parties reached an agreement. Burkhardt and the company are prohibited from listing the Singletree Court property or any other property within city limits on any short-term rental platforms. Any short-term rental listing by the company will result in a $5,000 per day per listing penalty. The company will also be responsible for any costs or fees the city incurs from the properties. Properties can be used as short-term rentals if the homeowner is granted a special exception by a hearing officer with the Carmel Board of Zoning Appeals, according to the city. Homes can be rented for 30 days or longer without authorization from the City of Carmel.
Thanks, Maura. Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita is leading a group of attorneys general from across the nation in filing a brief in support of a Texas age verification law for adult websites that is being challenged in the U.S. Supreme Court. The outcome of the case is expected to impact similar laws in Indiana and several other states that require pornography websites to verify the age of its users to prevent minors under the age of 18 from accessing the material. Rokita led the filing of the amicus brief with Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost. 22 additional states signed on to the brief, which argues that the state government has the authority to regulate the pornography industry through age verification. Free Speech Coalition, which includes Pornhub and a coalition of adult filmmakers, producers, distributors, wholesalers, and internet platforms, is challenging the Texas law as well as Indiana's in a separate lawsuit. The coalition argues that such laws violate both the U.S. Constitution and the Federal Communication Decency Act, infringing on adults' rights to privacy by requiring them to disclose too much information about themselves to access the material. The Texas case is currently set for oral arguments before the Supreme Court on January 15th. The Indiana lawsuit is pending in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Indiana. In addition to requiring age verification, Indiana's law allows parents or guardians of a child harmed by a violation of the age verification requirement to sue for monetary damages, injunctive relief, and attorney fees. Additionally, the law also gives the Indiana Attorney General the authority to investigate suspected violators of the law, seek an injunction against them, and a civil penalty of up to $250,000. Now, back to Maura for more news from the Office of the Attorney General.
A Florida-based realty company cannot advertise or offer services in Indiana for at least 5 years as part of a consent judgment that satisfies a lawsuit filed by the Office of Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita. In September 2023, the AG's office filed a complaint against MV Realty of Indiana, LLC, MV Realty Holdings, LLC, and various parties connected to them for allegedly conducting an aggressive and illegal robocalling and telemarketing operation targeting homeowners in Indiana. The realty company reportedly offered homeowners cash payments in exchange for, quote, a future interest in the sale of the homeowner's real property, end quote. But these agreements were just disguised extensions of credit with implicit interest that would be paid back by the homeowner at a later date, the suit claimed. Attorneys representing MV Realty did not respond to Indiana lawyers' request for comment. As part of the consent judgment, defendants agreed to several conditions, which includes being unable to advertise or offer services as real estate brokers or broker companies in Indiana for at least 5 years. Defendants must also file a release of all homeowner benefit agreements within 30 days of entry of the judgment and relinquish all rights to the agreements, deeming them void and unenforceable. The lawsuit's resolution resolved more than $800,000 in expected future receivables for the company, according to Rokita.
Thanks, Maura. A Lake County judge faces multiple ethical misconduct charges after allegedly sexually harassing court staff members. The Indiana Commission on Judicial Qualifications charged Lake Superior Court Judge Calvin Hawkins with 3 counts of misconduct. According to the statement of charges, Hawkins violated the Code of Judicial Conduct by acting inappropriately in ways that did not promote the independence, integrity, and impartiality of the judiciary. Hawkins was appointed as judge for the Lake Superior Court in 2007. According to the commission, Hawkins made sexual references to court staff and hugged and touched them in ways that made them uncomfortable. He admitted to the commission that he hugged people all the time. The Indiana Supreme Court has final authority to determine what and if any judicial misconduct occurred. The court can dismiss the charges, accept or reject a disciplinary agreement between the commission and Hawkins, appoint a panel of judges to conduct a public hearing, impose a fine, or impose sanctions ranging from a reprimand to a suspension to a permanent ban on holding judicial office in Indiana. Daniel, you also have news in the northern part of the state. What is happening in Delaware County?
An Indianapolis man faces more than 2 decades in prison after his sentencing for a November 2023 drunk driving incident that resulted in the deaths of 2 people. Delaware County Circuit Court Judge Judy Calhoun sentenced Walter Saucedo Mendoza to 24 years in prison. On November 20th, Saucedo Mendoza pleaded guilty as charged to 2 counts of causing death when operating a vehicle with an alcohol concentration of 0.08 or more, both level 4 felonies, as well as criminal recklessness, a level 6 felony. According to a probable cause affidavit, Indiana State Police responded to a fatal crash on November 12, 2023 on I-69 near the 234 mile marker in Delaware County. Saucedo Mendoza's toxicology report from his blood sample, which was taken at Ball Memorial Hospital after the crash, revealed a .186 BAC. He was arrested in February at his Indianapolis address.
Thanks, Daniel. Indiana Republican Party Chairman Randy Head has resigned from his role with the party effective immediately, the party announced last week. Head informed the party of his plans to return full-time to Krieg de Vault during the holiday weekend, according to a release. At Krieg de Vault, he is of counsel and focuses his practice on government affairs and public advocacy. Head was only party chair for 5 months. He succeeded Anne Hathaway, who had been in the position for 10 months. He plans to continue serving on the Indiana Republican State Committee as the 4th District Chair. Head led the party through the final stretch of a dominant election season for Republicans that saw victories in races for governor, lieutenant governor, U.S. Senator, and Attorney General. Governor-elect Mike Braun commended Head for his leadership throughout the election and in his transition so far. And finally, to wrap up this week's headlines, Daniel, tell us what you are working on for our next print edition.
For our next print edition, I'll have a story that takes a look at a proposed new Department of Labor rule that would prevent companies from paying workers with disabilities less than the federal minimum wage, which is currently $7.25 an hour. I'll talk to labor attorneys and disability advocates about the new rule and see if they think the rule will become permanent in the new Trump administration. You can read all about it in the December 18th issue of Indiana Lawyer.
Okay, that'll do for this week's headlines. As always, if you want more legal news, check us out at theindianalawyer.com.